Key points. Children take an active role in performing their gender, requiring substantial conscious and unconscious effort in peer groups. Different environments have different gendered expectations, with varying types of masculinity or femininity within one environment. Changing categories, shifting norms, and gender diversity. Focusing on how children fit certain norms is an important part of gender research, but it can overlook ways that children don't fit these norms. Sociologist Barry Thorne, in an influential ethnography of gender in the US schools, developed the term border work to refer to how children and adults build and reinforce boy-girl divisions. For example, a group of boys might refuse to let a girl join a football game, seen as a boys' game in her research as often elsewhere. Border work can occur when boys and girls play together within gendered groups. For example, when teams of girls chase boys, it can be reinforced by adults. For example, when they split the class into groups based on gender. The school institutional setting tended to emphasize gender divisions, and sometimes gender did not matter much. Most children Thorne studied played together across gender outside school, as well as border work maintaining gendered boundaries. Thorne describes border crossings, entering spaces normally identified for the other gender. This might mean playing with them, like the tomboys. In Rear's study, or dressing differently. For instance, a boy wearing a nail varnish or a dress. As discussed previously, it is often easier for girls to board across. This is usually greater anxiety from others if a boy wears feminine clothes than if a girl wears masculine clothes. Context affects borders. Crossing a girl might be happy to play with boys in her street, but not at school. Children who board across, deliberately or involuntarily, are often punished by peers through teasing, exclusion, or bullying. It is important to realize that almost all children struggle with gender norms at times. Childhood studies scholar E.J. Ronald et al. Conducted research with 10 to 11-year-olds in England, which showed they feel pressure trying to get gender right, even in very girly or boyish. There were constantly new situations to work out rules for, and maintaining a gendered identity may mean giving up some friends or activities. More recently, there is increasing understanding that all people identify with the sex that they are assigned at birth, and transgender experience has become more visible in the media and politics. In some contexts, children and young people who experience a strong discomfort with their assigned gender, known as gender dysphoria, have options to describe and understand their identity, and for some, this may involve gender transition. Social transition is where a child begins to live according to the gender they identify as. A child assigned female at birth may adopt a new name, be referred to as a boy, and called he or him by his family and school, or be referred to as non-binary person and called they or them. Children who strongly and persistently identify with a gender other than the assigned at birth may select medical transition undergoing medical treatment to align their sex characteristics with their gender identity. For those under 18, this usually involves puberty blockers, delaying the physical effects of puberty so they do not develop the sex characteristics which conflict with their gender. Although, as discussed in Chapter 1, this is highly controversial, and children's rights or otherwise to access this medical treatment has been contested. They can later choose to undergo hormone therapy so their sex characteristics better match their gender identity. Medical transition is rare and difficult to access in most countries, including the UK, requiring the approval of doctors after extensive psychological assessment. There is limited research on transgender identities, but they are thought to develop similarly to other children's gender identities. Trans young people may experience different trajectories of gender development, with some feelings clear discomfort with their assigned gender from a very early age, while others developing gender dysphoria around puberty, as Annie Pullen Santfakon found. Others may come to an understanding of their trans identity in older young adulthood, or indeed in adulthood. These trajectories might be influenced by social and family support or information availability. For example, some young people in Santfakon's study remembered feelings discomfort in their assigned gender at an early age, but experienced resistance from parents. So they suppress these feelings until they become difficult to ignore during puberty. For trans children, experiences of gendered childhood institutions can be particularly difficult. Eof Neary's research in Irish primary schools, interviewing educators and parents of trans children aged between 5 and 13 years, found celebratory occasions like birthdays and religious rituals were especially challenging. Gender came very obviously into view. A preschool had pink or blue bunting for a child's birthday, or children had to wear gendered clothing for the first communion mechanism that marked out the boundaries of belonging, often with exclusionary and deeply isolating effects for their children. Birthday parties, usually single gender, inviting all the boys or all the girls in the class, also caused significant distress. One child assigned female at birth wanted a boys-only party, but no boys attended, and the child was not invited to any birthday parties that year. The pressure of gendered institutions was also a focus of Tori Howell and Louise Allen. Research with Faye Fine and Fake Letty, young people in all boy faith-based secondary school in Aotearoa, New Zealand. The Samoan term Fea Fine translates as in the manner of a woman, referring to people assigned male at birth whose gendered behaviors are to varying degrees feminine. Whakaleti is the equivalent term for Tongans. They highlighted verbal insults and physical violence at school and being blamed for assaults against them. Curriculum, especially religious studies and physical education, was especially marginalizing, as were experiences of using a boys' toilet, with participants often avoiding them altogether. Uniforms and dress codes punished students if they attempted to grow their hair long or wear makeup. School prefects petitioned the boards of trustees trying to get the fee fine and faculty students expelled for being shame on the school due to their feminine appearance. Such research emphasizes how central the gender binary is to children's lives and the harms it can do to those who do not fit within it. The most children discussed in NEARI research identify strongly as a boy or a girl. In contrast, in their sex assigned at birth, and experienced difficulties when they were put in the wrong box. However, some experienced a more fluid gender identity. An increasing number of children and young people and adults identify as non-binary or gender diverse. They do not see themselves as either a boy or a girl, but as neither or a combination of both. This kind of identity may be more likely to emerge later in childhood, as children develop the ability to understand flexibility and complexity in categories. Sarah Bragatel. Research with young people aged 13 to 19 in England indicated that young people felt their generation was more accepting of gender diversity and equality. Participants expressed support for gender fluidity, rejected rigid gender binaries. However, they also described continuing gendered expectations, including sexual harassment and bullying for not fitting into gendered roles. The qualitative research discussed in this chapter suggests that children and young people often find rigidity, enforced binary gender norms potentially harmful to their well-being. This is supported by quantitative research. Surveys of the rates of mental health difficulties indicate that transgender and non-binary children and young people are more likely to experience self-harm, suicidality, and eating disorders compared to their peers across different countries. Connolly et al. But if children are supported in their gender identity by adults and peers, for example, using their chosen name and pronouns and allowing them to use facilities associated with their gender, they can thrive. Trans children may also be supported to socially transition, do not show greater mental health difficulties than children overall. Studies on mental health across populations indicate that transgender young people who go through medical transition do not differ in mental health difficulties to the overall population and have better outcomes than those who wanted but could not access this. Key points. Most children struggle to some extent with binary gendered expectations of societal and institutions. Some children are transgender, developing a gender identity that does not correspond with the sex that they were assigned at birth. Transgender children often experience discrimination and mental health difficulties, but supporting gender identity leads to greater well-being. Conclusion. Gender is a key social division in how adults think about children and how children grow to think about themselves. Gender is often assumed to be binary, consisting of two separate and opposite categories, based on the sex a child is assigned at birth, and the adults consciously and unconsciously treat boys and girls differently. However, evidence shows there are more similarities than differences between girls and boys. Children develop a gender identity at a young age, influenced by social context, but also deeply internally felt. Gender identity is embedded in unconscious, embodied habits and developed and maintained through interaction with others. adults and children, and through constructions of gender in the media and commercial worlds. Although we think of gender as neutral, children actively make their gender identities and constantly aim to get their gender performance right. Exactly what counts as right is socially constructed. It differs across settings and times and is influenced by factors like race and social class. Almost all children cross some gender boundaries at certain times, yet they frequently punish each other socially, and doing gender wrong, gendered perceptions and understanding have an impact throughout life. Many occupations are highly gendered and unequal. Occupations dominated by women tend to be lower paid than occupations dominated by men. Most children develop a gender identity that is consistent with the sex that they are assigned at birth. However, some develop a transgender identity outside the traditional binary of male and female. And although these have always existed, it is becoming more common for children and young people to express them. For trans and non-binary children and youth, navigating childhood's binary gendered landscape can be particularly challenging. However, adults listening to and respecting children and young people's identities and wishes and creating supportive environments, encouraging children and young people to express their identity without being constricted by gender expectations can be beneficial to all, whatever the gender